Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Today I would like to disclose new facts on international corruption, and they will be about two stories basically. The first story is how, through the banks of oligarch Viktor Pinchuk, as alleged by Ukrainian investigative journalists, $29 million were transferred to Hillary Clinton Foundation. The topic number two today is how the money of Ukrainian citizens is stolen under disguise of the gas tariff scam by means of purchasing the so-called European gas. I will show how, using the disguise of energy independence, the management of Naftogaz and their friends have earned $1.5 billion, and this scam was done under the umbrella of the people close to Vice President Joe Biden. In both cases, the money was leaking out of the country and used for corruption purposes. It was also used for political purposes of some of the American leaders. The same political figures were providing an umbrella and running the protection racket for similar schemes in Ukraine and abroad. What am I going to disclose today? I will disclose a scam according to which the management of energy company Naftogaz has came up with a scheme of selling Russian gas to the Ukrainians. They would then call this Russian gas a European gas, and just for this branding, for this new name, they would put into their pockets $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion is, according to the modest calculation of the experts. So, as alleged by Naftogaz, Ukraine for several years has not been purchasing Russian gas. In the internet, you can still find a website with a day count of how many days Ukraine managed not to purchase Russian gas. As of now, this website shows the number of 1,481 days. As alleged by Naftogaz, Ukraine is purchasing European gas instead of Russian gas. I would like to explain myself. I do not object Ukraine not buying Russian gas, but on the only condition that at the same time Ukrainian citizens would not be robbed. The trick is that this is the same Russian gas which goes all the way for the territory of Ukraine, then crosses the border of the country, goes 1 kilometer into the foreign jurisdiction, usually Slovakia, and then comes back as European gas. And as alleged by Naftogaz, this is not Russian gas just because we are purchasing it from non-Russian shell companies. However, there is one peculiar issue. Usually, the Russian gas is traded in Ukraine not by European, but Ukrainian companies instead. Or these are companies that are affiliated or related to the management of Naftogaz. They are trading this gas under the disguise for their own vested interest, claiming this to be part of energy independence policy. And this is done also under the umbrella of the US representatives in Ukraine. The fact that these two are working together should be viewed and interpreted as high treason, and I will explain why. The first negotiations on purchasing gas in Europe date back to President Yushchenko times. But Russian transit companies for a long time were reluctant to cooperate with Ukhrtransgaz company. Their excuse was that long-term contracts with Gazprom export company have its own peculiarities. Ukraine started importing natural gas from Germany via Poland in the context of the preparation for EU association starting from November 2012, based on the agreement with Naftogaz Ukraine and RWE Supply Trading Germany. Starting from April 2013, they started supplies of natural gas from Hungary. This was procured by DTEK company, and Andrzej Fowora was the person who was spearheading this procurement on behalf of DTEK. This was done through a Polish company, PGNiG. In 2013, gas imports from Russian Federation and Europe was done by 4 companies: Naftogaz Ukraine, Ostchem Firtash company, VTEC belonging to Mr. Kurchenko, and DTEK owned by oligarch Akhmetov. This experience was later utilized after the revolution of 2014. In 2014, based on the initiative of then Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk, the Cabinet of Ministers made a decision to diversify the supply sources of natural gas. The political decision was then implemented via a law which was passed by the Parliament of Ukraine on the natural gas market dated 2015. After that, the official supply of gas from Russia was decreased drastically, and on the other hand, this same supply of natural gas from Europe was increased. There is one interesting fact. Over 3.5 years, from 2015 to 2018, the average price of gas in Europe for 1,000 cubic meters of the same gas, which is purchased by Ukrainian citizens, was $211, and Naftogaz is purchasing at $245, the difference being almost $35. In July 2018 to April 2019, the average price in Europe was almost $238, and Ukraine was importing at $200 $88 US. The difference is $50 for each 1,000 cubic meters of gas. Now about how and who is earning money on imports of the so-called European, it is Russian gas. The largest importer is the company called Energy Resources of Ukraine, or ERU. Actually, there is a bundle of companies which has ERU abbreviation in its name, and they are registered both in Ukraine as well as in offshore jurisdictions. According to EU Control, in December 2018, private company ERU Trading replaced its name to Warland Trading. The final beneficiary of the last company that we mentioned is Andrei Favorov. This is what the document says. At the same time, ERU Trading Limited company was still left on the market. And Andrei Favorov is not only the final beneficiary of ERU Trading, but is also a deputy to the head of NAK Naftogaz, Andrei Kobyrev. But this is something we will touch on later. Now going back to the company of Andrei Favorov. Its share on the market is confirmed by their financial statements. They had quite a good performance. Their market share reached 8%. According to EU Control, the revenues of ERU Trading was going up until 2018, and then it went a little bit down. But in any case, we're talking about billions of dollars. From 2015 to 2018, just in 3 years, the earnings of ERU Trading was 15.6 billion hryvnia. Part of the revenues were taken out to offshore companies. For instance, from the 21st of July 2016 to 23rd of June 2017, the company has taken out and transferred to Aero Management Service LLC companies almost 348 million hryvnia. And from the 25th of May 2017 to 25th of July 2017, they have transferred to the same accounts 240 million hryvnia. On this slide you can see the flow of funds and transfers that in total amount to 620 million hryvnia. And this is just those amounts that we can present to the public based on the investigation of the journalists. Of course, we understand that amounts that were transferred outside of the country is much bigger than that. Now we are processing the money wires through Swiss companies and other offshore companies that were part of this money laundering scam. So who is hiding behind this ERU companies? His name is Andrei Favorov. He is the citizen of the United States and Russia. He was repatriated. He is a returnee from Moscow. His family is from Odessa. He worked for an American company in the third world countries, and starting from 2009 he worked in an affiliated company of AES Control Global in East European office of this company. Under Yanukovych's presidency, he was invited to Mr. Akhmetov's company, DTAC. He was hired to launch the natural gas supplies from Europe. In 2013, as Vice Director on Commercial Activity of DTAC, he signed the contract for natural gas supply with a Polish company, which then became the core partner of their firm. In 2013, as Deputy Director on Commercial Activity in DTAC, he signed the contract on natural gas supply with a Polish company, which then became the core partner of their company called ERU. Favorov also participated in creating the Swiss shell company under control of DTAC, which was called DTAC Trading ESA. This company was designated to ensure the imports of natural gas from Europe. He has his own pool of partners, and he also possesses the experience of ensuring the import of the so-called European gas for Ukraine. Andrei Favorov was appointed as a head of integrated gas business division in Naftogaz in November 2018. As alleged by mass media, they are close friends with Mr. Kobyrev. They're playing poker together, and he's of high value. So who was running a protection racket for this scam? Of course, Kobyrev, Favorov and the likes could not organize a multi-billion scam on their own without an influential protection. And we found the protector, the screen shield, in the supervisory board of NAK Naftogaz. One of the main architects of this scheme was the representative of the supervisory board of NAK Naftogaz, a person called Amos Hochstein. On the website of NAK Naftogaz, it says that he was consulting a vice president of the United States without indicating who that vice president actually was. And it wasn't very difficult for us to find out that the person they meant by a vice president was Mr. Joe Biden. So, who is Amos Hochstein, and what is his role in this Naftogaz scheme? On the 1st of August 2014, Hochstein became an acting special envoy and coordinator for international energy affairs. As a chief U.S. energy diplomat, Hochstein was working in close contact with Vice President Joe Biden and was accompanying him in his international trips in order to promote energy resources as main external policy instrument of the United States. Among the key goals of Mr. Hochstein on that position was to apply pressure on Ukrainian administration and President Poroshenko in order to enforce the reform of the energy sector and state-owned company NAK Naftogaz, which at that time controlled almost two-thirds of the energy resources of Ukraine. Mr. Hochstein didn't conceal the fact that in his actions he is subordinated to Mr. Joe Biden and practically is under his direct control. I was almost at every single meeting that Vice President Biden had with Mr. Poroshenko. I was on every single trip. I was present at the majority of the phone calls. This is what Amos Hochstein said in the interview to New York Times in 2019. Is it possible that the architects of Naftogaz reform, amongst which there was Mr. Hochstein, totally accountable to Mr. Joe Biden, not know about the scam with natural gas bypass and reverse supply of Russian gas back to Ukraine? Of course they did know that. And given that part of the stolen money was then transferred to the US companies, they also protected a shield, a cover-up for that scheme. So what was the outcome of their activities for Ukraine? Ukraine was forced to accept a erroneous energy independence model. In other words, Ukraine was forced to accept a very clear energy dependence model. Instead of increasing its own natural gas production, the gas was instead purchased from Europe via intermediaries. Some experts claim that the markup or the commission fee that was charged by these intermediaries was 35 to 50 euro, based on the difference of prices in Ukraine and Europe. In order to make this scam profitable, the purchase price for households and for industrial consumers inside Ukraine was increased 10 times. According to NAK Naftogaz, in 2014, Ukhrgaz Vydobywanie was producing 17.2 BCM of gas, while last year it was only 16.6. Several years ago, the head of NAK Naftogaz, Mr. Kovarev, announced an ambitious program, 2020, which envisaged natural gas production by 2020 to reach 20 BCM of natural gas production. In July 2019, Naftogaz acknowledged that this program failed. They also acknowledged that they have spent 40 billion hryvnia for this program and for this failure. In other words, they killed domestic gas production capabilities for the benefit of making money for themselves. Because the more Ukraine would produce in terms of natural gas, and the less imported gas they're going to buy, the less their earnings are going to be at the end. At the same time, they were making themselves rich using two pockets at the same time. So one source of revenue was these shell companies, these intermediaries. Another one was their official payroll. Let's take Kovalev, who was not ashamed of getting hundreds of millions in bonuses and millions in payroll, 1 million per each day of a very hard labor. The same is true for Mr. Prokhorenko, the head of the gas production company Ukhrgaz Vydobywanie. He was also not ashamed of getting the salary, which was equal to millions per month. We can see the correlation. The higher tariff price for households in Ukraine, the higher the payrolls and bonuses of the top managers of NAK Naftogaz is. The management of NAK Naftogaz got so cocky that in response to accounting chamber demand to provide access and to carry out the audit activities, which were based amongst others on the court ruling, for half a year they have been refusing to do so. The chairman of the accounting chamber, Valery Patskan, has recurrently spoken about this and reporting to the parliamentary budget committee of the previous parliament and this current parliament as well. So what needs to be done under these circumstances? The actions of the top management of NAK Naftogaz is good enough to be qualified as high treason, in our opinion. Under the disguise of energy independence, the imports of Russian gas were increased in this country, while our own natural gas production was put on hold. Therefore, today I will file a complaint based on Article 111 of the Criminal Code regarding high treason. In addition to this, together with other Parliament members, we will initiate parliamentary hearings dedicated to gas tariffs, the increase of our domestic gas production, and energy independent agenda in general. With MP Dubinsky, we have registered earlier a draft resolution on establishing an interim investigating committee to investigate the facts of international international corruption performed by top officials of Ukraine. In the framework of this investigating committee, we are planning to consider the work and operation of NAK Naftogaz in terms of gas imports as well as other issues. Recently, the President of Ukraine had a discussion with the Prime Minister of Ukraine and other officials issues related to gas price reduction for households. So, there is a solution for this problem. It would be enough just to take these shell intermediary companies out of the market, which are earning money without doing anything. Therefore, you can have at least 30% gas price reduction for the household of Ukraine. The spiders in this Naftogaz jar are already beginning to condemn each other of corruption and high treason, trying to make their way out of any responsibility for this. Several days ago, one of the top officials of Naftogaz, Yuri Vitrenko, confessed that the price increase is the price we have to pay for corruption and lack of professionalism. According to him, the price of gas is increasing on the regular basis because of the low gas output domestically and lack of competency and corruption inside NAK Naftogaz. Great, but what do you do then with these millions in payrolls and your bonuses? Money which is paid from the pockets of our citizens. This kind of corruption should be simply wiped out. If the Cabinet of Ministers is not successful in doing so, President Zelensky can simply invite Mr. Kovalev, Mr. Poroshenko, Amos Hochstein and Mr. Biden to his office and demand it from them to reduce the price by 30% by cutting off the intermediary shell companies earning money on the Russian gas supply, the scam which was actually built under their management. Before starting my second topic, I would like to point your attention to one interesting story. This is an episode from the life of Mr. Viktor Pinchuk. Several days ago, we were approached by fellow colleagues of Mr. Viktor Pinchuk, and they were working together in the past in the regional KGB department of the city of Dnipropetrovsk in the times of USSR. And I would like you to understand why am I emphasizing the word colleagues. These people read in mass media that one of the employees of Mr. Pinchuk, the member of the supervisory board of Credit Dnepr Bank, someone named Andres Osland, an active member of Atlantic Council, is heavily criticizing KGB and slanders the name of KGB for allegedly actively cooperating with active Soviet citizens, the same citizens who later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, became famous philanthropists, patrons and protectors of democratic values. Here I have the original copy of the agent's pledge. This is the pledge handwritten by Mr. Pinchuk himself. According to this pledge, Viktor Mikhailovich chose his code name, and that code name was Valery. So this is Agent Valery. I'm sure that very few of us have ever seen the agent pledge of the former KGB agent. Not to mention that this is the KGB agent pledge of the oligarch who's funding Hillary Clinton's campaign. The funding that was made possible by transferring the money outside of Ukraine. Well, because these people called me and they emphasized that the work of Mr. Pinchuk in KGB was very fruitful in terms of supplying the documents, and they also asked me to congratulate him with the upcoming KIST or KGB Agent Day, which is celebrated by all former KGB agents and servicemen on the 20th of December traditionally. Now, going back to our second topic. As I told you, the main character of this second story is the famous Ukrainian oligarch Mr. Pinchuk. As investigative journalists are reporting at this time, Mr. Pinchuk is actively shutting down his assets in Ukraine and is trying to sell as much as possible, including liquidating the Pinchuk Fund. This is also confirmed by mass media reports. There are all indirect indications that Viktor Pinchuk is planning to leave Ukraine, and now he's actively trying to sell his assets and clean up the mess. But what is the reason of Mr. Pinchuk organizing the so-called Black Friday for his companies? And why is he winding down his business? The answer is in the name of this conference, which is international corruption. We have all grounds to believe that this is yet another attempt to cover up his tracks. And it is also an attempt to rescue himself and save himself from an international scandal, and also to save his American friends and politicians. Pinchuk Foundation made a contribution to the Clinton Foundation. It wasn't a small amount of money. Some 29 million US dollars were contributed to a presidential campaign fund to make sure that Ms. Hillary Clinton, the representative of Democratic Party, wins US presidential elections. Who is aware of these facts here in Ukraine? On this slide, you can see the fact that yesterday Ukrainian law enforcement registered an investigation into criminal case, and as part of this investigation I presented the facts that are to be reviewed and considered by investigators and verify their trustworthiness. I would like to clarify this. The investigation has to identify how Pinchuk Foundation got his money, using which he then made a 29 million contribution to Clinton Foundation. But this is their American business. Instead, I would like to talk about Ukraine. We must know how much money was stolen, transferred, laundered, and then spent by Ukrainian politicians in the United States. It is high time for this kind of investigation. It will be much more difficult to do something like this later on. Among the things that I would like to disclose today is the big financial scam whereby Ukraine was robbed. We will disclose the facts that need to be carefully verified and investigated by Ukrainian law enforcement. So, what was the size of contribution of oligarch Pinchuk to the Clinton Foundation in millions of dollars? And where does this money come from? In 2015, the Pinchuk Foundation transferred a substantial amount of money to Clinton Foundation. According to French journalists, that amount of money was amounting to $29 million. Investigative journalists from France, which are quite famous in the journalist circles, they were investigating Mr. Sarkozy, the former French president, and amongst the journalists they are very much respected, both in France and in other countries. From 10 to 25 million of contribution out of the 29 million of total amount was also officially acknowledged by Clinton Foundation. Now let's look at where does this donation money come from. How was this scheme initially constructed? In April 2019, an international internet publication from France, which is known for its political investigation, called Mediapart, published a piece which is called Austrian Bank Participating in Money Laundering Schemes in Ukraine. The author of this piece, Keith Markbed, alleges first that by the decision of the Pechersk court of the city of Kyiv, dated May 2016, it was confirmed that some of the Ukrainian credit organizations were utilizing shadow schemes to take the money out through correspondent accounts of the Austrian main bank, and the damage from their actions was $800 million. Among the banks complicit in this scam was Credit Dnepr, owned by Mr. Pinchuk, and an affiliated Delta Bank. The indirect shareholder of both banks and a final beneficiary of Credit Dnepr Bank and Delta Bank was Viktor Pinchuk. Delta Bank has transferred to the Austrian bank, in particular, more than $87 million. These banks were receiving loans from National Bank of Ukraine with the funding that came from the IMF. Viktor Pinchuk Foundation is funded, amongst others, from private offshore companies. Starting from 2012, Pinchuk Foundation contributed to Clinton Foundation an amount of money equal to $29 million. And this is the outline of the facts as presented by French journalists, which should have become of interest for Ukrainian law enforcement. But since there was no reference or indication to the sources where this information was obtained, we tried to go through the item outlined in their presentation and verify these facts for ourselves. So the first item is whether there was indeed the court ruling which would state that a bank belonging to Mr. Pinchuk was actually laundering money through an Austrian bank. Yes, there was. We did find it. In the single state registry of court rulings, Credit Dnepr Bank and Delta Bank were transferring substantial financial resources by placing them on correspondent bank accounts in Mainl Bank AG in Austria. The amount of money which was not recovered from those correspondent accounts was $800 million. So the oligarchs, the corrupt bankers, according to this court, has taken more than $800 million illegally from Ukraine, and this is actually the money belonging to our citizens that probably we are not going to see anytime soon. The investigating journalist also handed over to me the correspondence between law enforcement bodies of France and Ukraine regarding the Mainl Bank. These materials only confirm that there was a criminal case in Austria regarding the Mainl Bank, while in Ukraine there was a criminal proceeding investigating the theft of money in Delta Bank amounting to $800 million. Here you can see the correspondence between Ukraine's General Prosecutor's Office and law enforcement bodies of Austria. By the way, the Austrian bank, which was used as a channel to steal the money of Ukrainian citizens, the 800 million, is closed now. It was closed by the European Central Bank. Here is the slide, and it says that decision dated the 14th of November, so just a month ago, formerly known as Mainl Bank AG, which was used to channel hundreds of millions of dollars from Ukraine's problem banks. Why do we allege that the money channeled out of Ukraine by Ukrainian oligarch was actually stolen in an unfair manner? Again, according to the information which is yet to be investigated and ultimately confirmed by the investigators, money that was stolen and then transferred to Hillary Clinton Foundation was also the money that was borrowed by Ukraine from IMF initially. Why do investigative journalists think that? And why do we think that as well? On the 11th of March 2015, Ukraine reached an agreement with IMF regarding the new 4-year extended fund facility for $7.5 billion. In that same month, Ukraine received the first tranche amounting to $5 billion. As a result of the so-called strange coincidence, in March 2015, the bank of Mr. Pinchuk, Credit Dnepr, received a stabilization loan of 357 million hryvnia. Here on this slide, you can see the excerpt from the archive regarding NBU providing the loan to Credit Dnepr Bank. In respect of Delta Bank, the NBU was much more generous. In early 2014, liquidity support loans of 400 billion, 150 million was provided to the bank, and in September 2014, a stabilization loan of 960 additional million was provided to the same bank. And now we are close to the final point, so let's go back to the beginning and see how this scheme was initially constructed from the beginning to the end. IMF is providing the loan to Ukraine in 2015. In that same year, the Credit Dnepr Bank receives from NBU 357 million hryvnia stabilization loan, and the Delta Bank receives in total more than 5 billion hryvnia. This money is then channeled out of Ukraine through Austrian Mainl Bank to offshore companies, and from offshore companies to the Pinchuk Foundation. This scam of money laundering is confirmed by the decision of Pechersk court dated May 2016. The overall damage of this scam, where other banks were also involved, as alleged by Ukrainian court and the prosecution office, is more than $800 million. The Pinchuk Foundations makes a contribution to the Clinton Foundation. Fifth is that the fact of this international corruption scheme was the basis for the Ministry of Interior of Ukraine to register a criminal proceeding So, what are some other things that I have done, apart from submitting my complaint to the Ministry of Interior? I have sent an official letter to US senators and congressmen, and also a letter to Mr. Giuliani, who confirmed his readiness to provide support in investigating the facts of international corruption. Earlier, in the official letter, I presented the well-known facts about and the sources of contribution to Clinton Foundation from Ukraine. Also, as I already mentioned, the international corruption is a matter that has to be considered by the interim investigating committee. This is the committee that was registered by me and my fellow colleague Alexander Dubinsky, and this committee is established with the purpose of investigating such international corruption. I would like to reiterate my own position. We need as thorough an investigation as possible regarding these facts of international corruption, because these facts involve oligarchs, officials, politicians, not only from Ukraine but also from United States. This is the only solution for successful restoration of strategic relationship and partnership of the two strategic partners and allies like Ukraine and the United States. Thank you for your attention. Any questions? Could you tell me, natalka.com, did Mr. Kuchma ever guessed that Mr. Pinchuk has earlier put his signature under that pledge? Well, I think this is something that you should ask Mr. Pinchuk himself, because as I told you, his fellow colleagues from Dnipropetrovsk KGB department called me and simply asked me to congratulate him on the upcoming holiday, and passed on this beautiful document. That report that you were reading, could you tell me, are you going to share this with the press? Of course, we have the press release, and all the documents that we presented here are uploaded on Nabu Leaks website, and they are available both in the Ukrainian version as well as in the English version. If there are no questions, thank you very much for your attention.